Jay Gabler, Duluth News Tribune arts and entertainment reporter, back with another special installment of the DNT Minute featuring my column, Front Row Seat. This week is about a really memorable trip that I took to Bayfield on Monday for an installment of a discussion group dedicated to J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. We made a fellowship of 8, gathering under darkness at the direction of a cleric. We observed a hobbit grace. We broke bread. We pored over a map of Middle-earth. We spoke of Boromir's temptation. And a bard invited us to raise our voices in chorus for a climactic Ring of Fire. Yes, the Johnny Cash song. On Monday night, I joined Pastor Lawrence Lee at Core Community Resources on Manypenny Avenue for one of a series of weekly gatherings he's convening under the theme Lenten Journey Through Middle-earth, inspired by author J.R.R. Tolkien's classic fantasy, Lord of the Rings. Imagine a potluck dinner, book club, concert, philosophical discussion, and trivia night all rolled into one, and you'll have some idea of the vibe. Well, the turnout was modest at the cozy venue, with a kettle of soup sitting on a brass rail bar under hanging string lights. It wasn't for lack of interest. In early spring, the quiet South Shore town is a dark 2-hour drive from Duluth, and even more isolated from other populous spots. But for those who wish to share in the fellowship, the journey must be made. Lawrence Lee, whose moss-green clerical shirt matched the lining of his plaid fleece, said, "People are saying, are you going to open this up? Is there going to be a virtual component?" I thought about that for a while, and I was like, you know what? No. These books are about community and food, honestly, and I really wanted this to be something that we did around tables. As music by the Tolkien Ensemble played over a Bluetooth speaker, Lee continued. Washington State, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Washington, D.C., I've had people write to me from all over saying, hey, we really want to participate in this. Sorry, Lee responds. The events are Bayfield only. The handful of attendees who filtered in on Monday, ranging from millennials to baby boomers, came from as close as just up the hill. A couple people journeyed from nearby Lake Superior shoreline cities. I was the only one, as far as I could gather, to have crossed state lines. Serious boots were ubiquitous. Attendees shed layers of fleece, flannel, and wool as they sat down to a supper of North African bean stew with a side of spicy falafel. Good for the sinuses, said a participant named Russ. And dessert servings of cherry angel food lembas squares. Pastor Lee estimated that he's read Lord of the Rings, which is a single saga published as a 3-book series from 1954 to 55, 24 times. This is the first time, though, that the Bayfield Presbyterian church leader has convened a discussion series based on the books. After welcoming the group, Lee led us in a Hobbit Grace, inspired by a moment in the Two Towers when characters stand before a meal and face the west to honor the lands of past glory. Hobbits also have a custom of bowing to their host, added Lee. He said, our hosts would be Cor, and Mary's not here this evening, but let's bow towards the kitchen as if Mary were here. That would be the late Mary Rice, known as the Queen of Bayfield, who died in 2020. Core Community Resources was founded in 2006 by Rice, who owned the space that long operated as a restaurant named Maggie's. An outdoor sculpture and a painting in the foyer are among lingering reminders of Maggie's signature flamingo motif. As we sat down to soup, Lee recapped the journey of the Fellowship of the Ring, formalized at the Council of Elrond. There was a trivia competition to name participants in that gathering. The winner took home a half-dozen eggs freshly laid by Lee's chickens, 2 of whom are named Gandalf and Gandalf the Grey. Russ, grinning, said, I know Elrond was there. Lee said, that's a gimme. That's like, who's buried in Grant's tomb? Once we were up to speed on the quest to destroy Sauron's ring and the fires of Mount Doom, we paused for our first musical interlude. By way of clarification, one participant asked, what would be the difference between a league and a mile? For the musical interlude, Vincent Shorin, the bard of the evening, stood resplendent in a velvety robe to perform an original setting of Tolkien's Bath Song. Shorin said later, it feels right to share a confession. I have not once read or seen a Lord of the Rings book or movie. That said, the musician explained while standing over a small electric organ, I've thoroughly enjoyed being part of this conversation. Just appreciate the sense of community here and the storytelling. Mindful that not everyone has time to slam 500,000 words of high fantasy between Ash Wednesday and Easter Sunday, Lee has delineated various paths to participation. Ahead of next Monday's meeting, for example, attendees might take The Path of Sam and read the first half of The Two Towers, or The Path of Mary, read a single chapter of that book, or The Path of Pippin, consider some discussion themes, or The Path of Fredegar, bring a side or a dessert. Each week's discussion has a theme, and on Monday, Lee shared a prepared reflection on the theme Galadriel and Boromir, Temptation and the Seduction of Power. The pastor removed his glasses and leaned against the bar, his wavy, pointed gray beard suggesting a wizardly Burl Ives. He observed, Lent begins with a story of temptation. One of the things that Jesus is tempted by in the wilderness is power, and that's really what's being offered to Galadriel here, absolute power. Galadriel, a revered elf, turns the ring away, knowing it would corrupt her. The human Boromir is more equivocal when facing his own temptation. Lee said, he wants to do the right thing, but he doesn't know what that is, and he's struggling. The discussion covered intriguing plot details, like why didn't Galadriel say more about the danger Boromir presented? And the differences between the books and Peter Jackson's blockbuster movies. The books are much more subtle, participants agreed. And the importance of simple acts of generosity. Lee cited Tolkien's World War I experience, where, according to the pastor, he encountered people like Sam, decent people who were in over their heads. Finally, it was time for a rousing ring of fire, and everyone packed up to leave. Lee invited participants to prepare for next week brief reenactments or readings from the text. He said, it's completely optional, but it would be an opportunity to lay into your thespian chops a little bit. Lee keeps coming back to Lord of the Rings, he said, because he finds something new every time. By way of example, he said, 3 years ago, dealing with the response to the death of George Floyd, I came upon this quote where a hobbit tells this lawman, this sheriff in the Shire, if it's not an honorable job, stop doing it. I'm like, whoa, that's very pertinent to what we're dealing with right now. Still, said Lee, I don't think there's anything magic about Tolkien's literature. I think Tolkien's a good writer. Not the best writer ever, but a good writer. The magic, perhaps, is what you make of it, with some hearty soup, a little music, and a distinctly Northland form of Hobbit grace. That's this week's column. I'll be back next week with a column about the upcoming Duluth Playhouse production of the Stephen Sondheim musical Into the Woods, and a special class that the organization has been convening to teach adults in the community about not just that musical, but about how musical theater productions come together. Until then, I'm Jay Gabler, Duluth News Tribune.